Yeah, welcome everybody to our webinar today. My name is Robert, and as most of you already know, I'm a technical architect here at Kupp, based in Austria. And today I would like to talk about best practices for Azure and code analytics, of course. Okay, but as I said, today we will start with the basics. So if you're entry points, I would like to show you how to basically set up a project based on best practices. So we don't have to figure out at the end of a project, in the middle of a project, how we can fix all of those issues like coding things and so on. So we would like to have a best practice proved project setup from the very first day. That's the goal. And of course, I would like to give you an outlook what we are going to do in the next couple of months. So we would like to show you how to analyze code in an automated way. So if you have a big project and you would like to understand the quality, the level of quality, and if you have any issues in your code base or in your flows or whatever, I will show you how we can do that automatically so we don't have to read it line by line. And before we start, one more thing. Quick introduction about us. As I said, most of us already know us. We're a Kupp software based in Austria. We are nice. We focused on Microsoft technology and especially Power Platform and Azure. So here are a few topics what we're actually working on, but I will introduce you to those topics in the details in a few slides, then we can focus more on that. So let's take a quick look at our agenda for today. As I said, it's a more or less hands-on session. So I would like to start up with Visual Studio and show you a few things so we can basically set up a project together, and we'll tell you a few hints how we can improve the setup, and we don't have to create additional things like fix projects to do migrations and so on. So we'd like to have a very clean structure so everybody knows how to add new functionality without messing up the whole solution. Before we do that, a quick introduction, and that's a very important point for me, why code matters, because many people don't care. They say, okay, we can use no-code, low-code components. That's okay, but there are many reasons why we should use code in some cases, especially if the logic is too complicated. It doesn't make sense to try it with logic apps or any other way. Sometimes code is more efficient because you got a lot of proven tools for testing and of course quality assurance. But on the other side, of course, it's more complicated. And if you analyze it, if you would like to know what's going on, you have to read it line by line in most cases, and that takes time. And this is why I think we should find a way how we can do it in an automated way so we don't have to read it line by line, and especially to provide those infos to people without a developer background. So you don't need to understand the code, but you know what's going on. And that's also our goal. And yeah, as I said, best practices for Azure and Power Platform. There are many components. We cannot cover all of them in our session today, but we have multiple sessions, and I will show you that in our Outlook slides where you can see what we will introduce you in the next couple of months. And yeah, the quick start. So basically project setup, we will see that later, and a few other minor topics here. And the most important part is code analytics. There are many critical coding issues. Most of them are pretty easy to solve, but if you have a big project and you have many lines of code or many other components, it's pretty messy to fix all of those things and also test the side effects. So it's a very complicated thing, and this is why I would like to give you a few hints as well. And yeah, the more or less last point for today, I would like to introduce you to our technology. Actually, that's the second part of our hands-on demo today. I would like to show you how we can analyze the code in real time directly within Visual Studio. So if we do something, we can analyze it, and we know, okay, what is wrong, how we can improve it. And this is just the first part of our current release. I cannot show you all the features because this would take too much time, but as I said, there will be a couple of follow-up webinars. Okay, cool. Before we move on to the hands-on session, let's take a quick look at the different topics here. And I know best practice is always a very big thing. Yeah? There are no straightforward guidelines. At least there are a couple of recommendations, but sometimes it's pretty hard to follow them. So of course, one important thing is if you have code, you should manage in the proper way with source control. I mean, I've seen this so many times in projects that people are using a text editor or whatever to edit web resources, and everybody's just updating stuff without any logical way, without any centralized system to do that. I mean, we do have source control systems, everything works. Why we are not using it for Dynamics projects? Yeah, that's a pretty bad thing. Yeah. So this is one important thing. And about the other categories, this one is actually the most important thing for today, best practice analytics. So this is just the entry point. Today I would like to focus on that. And after that, when we have covered all of those things, we will move on to the other topics. But best practice means in our case, we would like to set up a proper project, a solution. We know how to add code, we know how to add web resources, and we don't have to figure out every single time when we add new logic, how we can create the new projects. And of course, the other topics like CI/CD concepts, you know it's much better if you have an automated way to deploy solutions and configurations and stuff, so you don't have to start multiple applications, and there's always a risk of typos or any human errors. So yeah, you should implement a CI/CD concept, and nowadays it's quite simple, so it shouldn't be a big deal. And about security, I don't mean that you should think about your concept and so on and implement every single detail. It takes too much time, but you should think about it and you should create a concept. I've seen it so many times in projects that people implement the logic because it's more important than other stuff. And at the end, or in the middle of the project, hey, we have to apply a security concept. And then the whole thing is a mess because you will run into a lot of issues, a lot of side effects when you switch the context of some logic from admin to some other user, limited user, without the privileges, you will run into a lot of issues. So apply the concept from the very first day. It saves you so much time. Yeah, and by the way, we'll talk about that later as well, how we can automate the process to have a implemented automated way to fix actually to detect and fix those things, so we don't have to check it every time. Yeah? And logic optimization is another interesting topic. Well, it doesn't mean that you have to think about your code or your flow or whatever again and again. I mean, you should avoid duplicated logic. So if you distribute the logic in many different places, many different components, it's very hard to identify what's going on if you need to know the triggers. Yeah. So try to keep your logic together. And of course, you can use multiple components, but you should have a concept how you can distribute the logic without overriding each other's things. Yeah. And yeah, some other things like performance and enterprise projects, but this is not the focus for today, so I think we can skip those things for now. Then let's move on. And as I said, the session today is focused on hands-on experience. So I would like to show you a setup, how we can create a new solution with Studio, very straightforward, one simple plugin, and some common tasks like retrieving some data and so on. So I will not show you the basic stuff, how we can write plugins. Yeah, there are many other tutorials, but I would like to show you how can you do it in a proper way so you don't have any other issues in the solution structure. So you know exactly where you can find which things like classes, the domain and so on, and how you can add new logic. Yeah, because I've seen it so many times that people create a solution, then many projects, and at the end you have multiple solutions and nobody knows what's actually going on, and then it's very complicated if you would like to implement CI/CD concepts with unit testing or whatever, and some parts are not covered by solutions, so you need to include multiple solutions and stuff. So that's pretty messy. So this is why we would like to have a very clean setup in the beginning. So let's do that. And here we go. Go back. So let me start with a very simple project I got with Studio 2022. So I can create a new project now. And by the way, I'm running on a beta version of KCA. So maybe there will be some little glitches, but let's see. Okay. What we do first is we would like to create a library. That means you can go for all platforms and we say class library. Okay, and in this case, we want to go with .NET Standard Framework. And I know it's deprecated, but many projects are still on .NET Framework, and this is why I would like to start with this one. And let's call it A, because this morning I already did the same thing, and this is why I have to call it A, but we can just put it somewhere. Looks good. Nothing else. One important thing, do not place your solution in the same directory. If you have one solution for a plugin and then you have a some projects for your plugins and everything is within the same folder, it's difficult to understand the difference. And also I recommend to create for each entity a project. That's a very simple reason for that, because if you have multiple entities and multiple DLLs, you can update one without any side effects for the others. So if you have a bigger team, everybody can work on an entity. If you have just one assembly with multiple entities, you update it, and on the other side, you will basically destroy or the changes from other team members. And this is why we should split it. But for this session, I think it's fine. So let's start with this one. Okay, so rather simple thing here. The first thing I have to do in most cases is I would like to install the SDK. Let's do that. And as I said, this is nothing special, so okay, cool. Takes a few seconds. The next things I would like to show you is, okay, how we can write a few baseline of code and how we can convert it in a okay. How we can convert it into 𝗲𝗏𝗏 entities. That's one thing, but also how we can retrieve data and convert it in an automated way. So we write it first in the more or less low quality way, and then we can convert it into better quality. So what I have now is, okay, I have normal class. Let's rename it to count. And we also need plugin. Okay, cool. By the way, this is in most cases the first mistake. I would never use the plugin interface directly. I will always put in base class, because you don't have to retrieve all that weird stuff where strings. Yeah, so this is pretty messy, but I think also all of you already know that. But for our example here, it's fine. Yeah. So then give me a second to copy some of my prepared examples here, because I don't want to write the whole thing here for you. As I said, so okay, this is the usual stuff. I think there's nothing special. And then I can start with, okay, let's say I would like to retrieve something. Yeah, so I have my service and I would like to retrieve an entity. So what people usually do is, okay, I have to write an entity name now. That's a pretty bad thing. Of course, it works, yeah, but you have no quality checks and you have to write it again and again. And there's actually always a high risk that you have some typos. And so that's a pretty bad thing. Yeah. So what I can do now is I can enable IntelliSense. Yeah, that's one thing. So let's do that. I need to configure my connection here. And yep. So let's go. And of course, it doesn't matter what you select here. So you can define your connection type like 𝗲𝗏𝗏. By the way, I got MFA enabled. That's not good. I actually recommend to use an application user, but for now, I think it should be fine. And depending on your environment, it takes up to 2 minutes to basically download all the metadata and cache it. That's the only way how we can implement IntelliSense directly with Studio within a few milliseconds. This is why we have to do that the first time. So let's wait a few seconds until it's done. Okay. Hopefully there will be no error. Yes, that's cool. Okay, so now it's a little bit cooler because I can do this now. That's pretty cool. This is just a normal custom entity configuration thing, and I will not execute the code, so I can just use some random value now. But here, I would like to retrieve something, and that's the name. Okay, so in this case, okay, I can retrieve it. And another part is what people sometimes do is they're using the GUI directly in your code. Well, it works if you make sure that you deploy it in a correct way, so you can align the grids through all of environments, then it's fine. But it's not pretty nice, yeah, so I don't like it at all. And here something's missing. Okay. What we can do now is, if I retrieve it, usually people would like to access the value, of course. So this is the next thing I can do. Okay, I can take the value. So I retrieve some the entity based on the name, and then I can get the value. So in this case, I can say, okay, now I have my value. Okay, that's pretty simple, yeah. And as I said, this is not the correct way, or actually not my preferred way to do it, but I would like to show you a few examples, and then we can convert the whole thing in a better code. So for now I have the value, okay, that's okay. And then we can go on and use some kind of query expression. So in this case, it's much better. Let me like this as well. So, okay, now I got my query expression, and of course, I got the same features here, so I can use it directly, and I got the name and so on. So in this case, it's much better because I don't need to know the GUID. I can just use the name. So for example, you have some configuration entity. That's a very common thing, yeah. And you got some names and you got the value. So in this case, I would like to define the administrator username so I can retrieve it to do some impersonation or something like that. So I got the name here and then the columns, and then I need to retrieve it. I also got it here. And that's okay. So by the way, this first or default thing is always a little bit critical. I usually do not recommend it, except if you're really sure that there's just one record, yeah, then it's fine. Or at least there's a one record, yeah, then it should be fine. In this case, I know that the admin user is there. If not, okay, something really bad happened. So let's assume we have it now. Okay, then we got the result. And of course, with the result, I can move on. But that's a bad thing because actually I need the user ID. So in this case, I know, okay, the name, but then I have to do the same thing again to retrieve the user. So let's do that. And remember the use case, I basically just need to know the ID of the administrator so I can do impersonation. Yeah. So I need many lines here to, let's call it user query. So I need many lines here to, okay, sorry about that. To implement the whole thing, yeah, and that's not cool. Yeah? In this case, I need the system user. And let's say the domain name. And the domain name is the result. And here we need value. Yes. Okay. So if you remember that, okay, this is the configuration value, and now I have the name. And with the name, I can retrieve the whole thing, but I only need the GUID, so I don't need the column set here. And let's say this is the result too. And okay, cool. Now I have the correct user. Many lines with a high risk of mistakes. So I don't like too much code. I would like to my code be simple and not complicated. And yeah, so if I do that, let's take it like this. I think this is easier. Two more lines here. So what I can do is I retrieve it, and okay, I already got it here. Let's remove this one. And then I can impersonate. So I basically create another service context. And with this one, I can do some special operations if the whole plugin context is user-driven. So I'm limited. This is why I need the admin user. So with this admin context, I can execute additional operations if necessary. So that's a very common case here. But as I said, it's too much code. Yeah. So I don't like it, actually. And I also don't like the values here. It's nice to have IntelliSense, but it's much better if you have generated code. So let's do that. I think that's a very cool thing. Yeah. In most cases, you can install some tools and so on, or you can basically write your own scripts, but I would like to have it simple. And this is why we said, okay, we would like to have the whole thing easy to use without any scripting. So what I usually do is I create a shared project. Because as I said in the beginning, I usually don't have one project. I have one DLL, one project per entity. So in this way, it's possible to update DLLs without overwriting changes from other colleagues, at least if they're not working on the same entity. But okay, let's call it domain. And here we go. And by the way, short project simple thing. So if you add some files there during the build process, Visual Studio will include them. So it's not part of the whole Roslyn compiler pipeline. It's more or less a functionality of Visual Studio, but that's okay for us. So let's go ahead and let's generate some code. And as you can see, the whole thing is pretty simple here. So it's not about code generation. I think it's a very straightforward, simple thing, yeah. But many people don't do it because it's too complicated. They say, okay, let's just start a project and we don't care about that. We do it later. As I said, do it in the beginning. I'm talking a lot of stuff right now, but if you just go straight ahead, it takes 2 minutes, less than that. So let's start with it. I can keep all of those things. I use a static entity source. I can use the solution as well, but for now it should be fine. But also let's add configuration. And as you can see here, the code preview includes a couple of things, like, okay, organization service extensions. So if you have some custom APIs with response and so on, that's a very important thing. Please do not write it manually. Yeah, code generation is so much better than that. Yeah, and not just about entities, but also for custom APIs. Yeah. So this is why we have all of those things now. And of course, we got our context and some entities. In this case, it's just a preview. This is why we have just a count here. And of course, we got some enums and so on for the option sets. And there's many stuff here, but for now, we can keep it like this. Good. Okay, cool. So now we have our entities here. I think it's very simple. The account, as I said. And actually, I really like this one. This is a very simple thing, but it's pretty cool to have the ID here, so we don't have to set it manually every time. Yeah, and of course, custom APIs and so on. So a couple of things. And yeah, basically, the JSON file is just an organizational thing to be able to regenerate that. And one interesting part is it just takes a few seconds because everything is cached. So we have the whole metadata here. Of course, we can refresh the cache, but usually if you would like to regenerate the code, it just takes a few seconds, even for bigger projects. Yeah, that's a pretty cool thing. Okay, but let's go back to our example here. So what I can do now is I can use, of course, my generated entities, and I forgot to add my reference here. Okay, let's do that. Okay, cool. And so what I can do now is I can basically retrieve this whole thing within one call. So I just need one request to do all of that stuff. So let's go ahead and use it. We already got this one. Let's call it. Oh, okay, it's not there. So here we go. Okay, that's cool. Of course, we can use link for that, and this is the biggest advantage if you have early bound entities, so you don't have to use a query expression. You can basically write it directly within one statement, and that's really cool. So let's try it. And we say, okay, we need the system. Okay, we need the user, and we forgot to add the user. Let's do that. Because this is just a predefined example here, but let's add the system user. Code. as I said, just a matter of seconds. Okay, this one is not interesting for us. And as you can see, we got the system user now. So that means we also got the system user set. Okay, cool. And yeah, so okay, before I forget, yeah, okay. And of course, now we need to join our configuration. So that means we go to our configuration and say, okay, we need the opposite domain name. Yes. Okay. I got my cheat sheet here over there, so I don't forget the whole thing. Okay. Oh, wrong one. This one. Okay, cool. So if you remember that last time we used the condition to compare the domain name to the value of our configuration. And yes, this was my mistake. We need value, of course. And so actually now we have the link between a service entity, the system user and our configuration. And now we have to set the condition. So we retrieve the white one. And this is, of course, the same name. And we need the system user. And usually I recommend to just retrieve the ID, because if we need the ID and nothing else, it's so much faster. Yeah? And for now, it's fine if we retrieve the whole user, but it's another topic about performance. We will talk about that the next time. But in this case, I have it and it's only one. So it should be fine, even better, singular default. Because if we have multiple admin users configured, it's a bad configuration and we should throw an exception. So let's add that as well. Good note. Okay, that's cool. But behind the scenes, this is basically executing the same request as query expressions, but it's so much better, yeah, because first point is you got libon entities, and second part is it's just one query, and it's less code, so you don't need all that stuff here. Yeah? And I understand that people sometimes are afraid because they are not familiar with this kind of syntax, but get used to it, and I think it's much faster than everything else. Yeah. Okay, cool. Now I got my admin ID. Everything is fine, and of course, I can basically do the same thing here. And now I have a better structure. Okay. And this is basically what I want to show you. And we will go back to a few theory slides now. But oh, sorry, I forgot. We will talk about web resources as well. But then later, at the end of the session, we will convert the whole thing automatically to a better code. But before we're running out of time, let's move on with web resources. That's one more thing I would like to show you here. And usually it doesn't matter which kind of project you're using, but I prefer ASP.NET application. At the end, it doesn't matter, as I said, because we are not going to execute the whole ASP.NET pipeline or whatever web server context. We don't need it. We just need the files there. The only thing we have to think about is if you add some quality tools like gsynth or whatever, it's easier if you have a web application template. But yeah, let's call it web resources. Okay, that's fine. Should be empty. Okay, cool. So I got my empty project. Yeah, there's nothing else actually what I need. But now we need a new folder. And yes, please use folders for that, so you don't have all of that stuff just in a random place. Yeah, so it's easier if you have it here. And one more thing, what we also need is we would like to use generated code. And this is actually so much better. It's more or less the same thing as for C#. Yeah, you would like to have generated code. Basically, I recommend to use TypeScript, JavaScript, and select the domain. And by the way, I know our documentation is pretty outdated. We are working on the improvements now. So I don't want to waste too much time on the details here. But yeah, let's see, is this more webinar 7? And I got my lib here. Okay, cool. As you can see, I have my generated code. This is just one example, so I don't need to know all of those numbers. That's always a thing that people do. They just compare numbers, and that's pretty bad. Just use functions for that. And it's always the same, so you should generate some code for that. And yes, okay, that's. And now what's going on behind the scenes is a lot of code will be generated. So we basically generate code for each feature, for each form. So we got the account, we got the account for interactive experience form and so on, because every form is different, and this is why we need different files for that. But yeah, also some other things, and it's a little bit about performance, because if you basically generate code for all possible types, it's too big, and we would like to have a good user experience, and this is why we focus on the most important stuff. So the rest is not important for us now, but let's add a new file. So it's a very common use case. Let's say, okay, this is account.js, and now I can work with my files. So important is to add the reference so that we should know what we need. And we got our web resources here. Oops, sorry. And now we got account. Sorry, what was it? Account form. Okay, I think there's something wrong with my IntelliSense for JavaScript. I think I've disabled it. Okay, something is wrong. I think I have to check that later. Yeah, okay. I don't know why, but usually it should work. It's here. Try it one more time. Yes. Okay, I have no idea why it was not working now, but now we got it. So we got the form context, and this is basically my form now, and I can work with that. So when I have my account attribute or object here, I can access all of the different attributes without actually knowing the name. Yeah. But let me show you how it works with TypeScript, because this is obviously the much better way. So I'm going to. And this one, okay. Rename it, yes. Cool. So let's do the same thing again, and let's see for TypeScript. And as I said, this is much better. Strong types, and that means there's a lower risk of any mistakes here. So as you can see, we have the same thing, but a very important point is, of course, you cannot execute TypeScript. That's not possible. So you basically have to convert into the JavaScript, and this is why we need a build for that. And Visual Studio is pretty intelligent, so it will suggest to install it. This is basically just a step. It will add some build steps to convert it. And here we go. Let's build that stuff. So now it's building. This basically means, okay, it will generate the JavaScript in the background. But yeah, sorry, I forgot that. Okay. Let's do it one more time. Hopefully it works now. Okay, let's see. Yes. So now I got my JavaScript files. I think this is something from the previous JavaScript files, but you can see it now. I have all of my files here. And now I can do the following. That's pretty cool. I can use my files. And I can say file one. All web resources. And now I need my XAMPP thing, but you can get it via get default or get global context and so on, but you know how it works. And now, of course, I can access all of my stuff. And this is the very cool thing, yeah. So I don't need to write all of that stuff down, yeah. And the same thing is if I need to have the types here, it's not just the value, it's called, okay, usually I don't use the whole namespace because it's pretty weird sometimes, so there are better ways to do that. But let's say I got account, code now, and now I can basically compare it, yeah, and that's a pretty cool thing, so I don't have to deal with magic numbers. Okay, cool. One last thing regarding deployment. Yes, I would like to update my stuff directly from Visual Studio, and this is why we have those features as well. So I can now deploy it to Dynamics, and in this case, it will create a new thing or update one. I think we already have something similar, and this is the next point, new. It's also a very bad thing, so don't do that. This is why I would like to add the option. Here we go. Let's do that here. And by the way, those things are saved within the solution, actually a new file in the same folder. So if you define it once, your team colleagues, members can also use it. So you don't have to do it multiple times. But yeah, so let's try another one. Yes, it's much better. And if you notice, this is a JavaScript file. And so we will basically look up the related JavaScript file and upload it directly to Dynamics. But of course, we're working with TypeScript. So at the end, we can convert it. But yeah, as I said, that's pretty straightforward. And let's do another thing just to be sure that we did the right thing. Let me pull that over. It sometimes takes a few seconds, but this brings me to the next topic regarding dependencies. Usually I prefer to merge the files. I know there's some weird feature where you can set dependencies, but to be honest, I've never seen this before that somebody's actually using it. I don't know if you use it, just let me know, please. I would be interested to know. And yeah, this thing is loading. I don't know why it takes so long, but anyway, I think we can skip that part. So let's go back to our slides here. So this was the demo, and as I said, this is the start of a webinar series, and this part, or the last part, was very focused on hands-on experience with very basic stuff. Yeah, so not much to do with analytics. We'll talk about analytics later today, but as I said, this was the first time best practices, and I would like to focus on the left box webinar series. The next time we will talk about analytics, like performance analytics, and how we can improve the code, not just for plugins, but also for workflows and Azure flows, cloud flows, and so on. So multiple components, also business rules, and so on. Then later on, we will talk about Azure. So integrations, how we can basically analyze code, which is a component of a longer data flow, like, okay, it's enterprise service bus, you got some Azure functions and so on. So we're going to analyze the code as well. And then we will talk about global integrations and data flows. But yeah, this is part of another webinar. Today, I would like to focus on the basics. And this is why I would like to introduce you to two of the things we are using right now. Kupp Code Analytics, which is basically a Visual Studio extension. It was made for developers, and it's pretty helpful. It has this IntelliSense stuff and so on. So a lot of nice features, which makes it actually easier to set up a project. You have seen it now. That's just a matter of minutes to set up Code Analytics with a code generation and so on. So it's a very easy, straightforward thing to set up a good project. And there's another thing, it's an analytics portal, but I think we will talk about it later. This will basically, yeah, will extend our scope for today. So let's talk about it later. A few common code analytics tasks, and I think we asked the same question on LinkedIn. The most difficult part, at least in my opinion, is to find triggers of distributed logic. Yeah, so you have many different components, and you don't know, okay, what is the trigger of that? So you have your logic apps and some other things. It's complicated, and you actually need to open every single component and take a look at that. And this is why we got a KPI for that. So this is a second product, a web platform where you can analyze all of those things. I will introduce that later this year, or maybe beginning of next year, I'm not sure. But the main purpose of our technology, of our code analytics technology, is to cover all of those things. So we would like to provide an automated way to cover those things. You don't have to waste 5 days to do some analytics task. We would like to do it within a few seconds. And this is our goal. And this is why I would like to introduce you to the whole topic here. But for now, let's take a look at a few do's and don'ts. Yeah. So on the left side, the very common things, yeah, but a lot of people do it in the wrong way. So when you start with Visual Studio, Visual Code, it doesn't matter. It's much better than Notepad. Yeah? So you should use a proper IDE to manage your code, and of course source control. Without that, it's a pretty messy thing. Yeah, and of course the ICD pipeline, as I said, we have seen it already. Early bound logic, plugin base class. It's much better. Yeah, you cannot change it later. I mean, you can, but it's a lot of work. So try to avoid that, and if possible, move to TypeScript. I mean, it sounds like it's a very easy thing to do, yeah, all of those points, but I've seen in so many projects that people don't do it because they think, okay, it's not important. I have to invest some time to learn TypeScript. Yeah, that's true. But if you learn it, you will save a lot of time later on down the road. So you don't need that. And a few don'ts, yeah, early bound is, it's okay in some cases. Of course, there are a few exceptions like generic logic and so on. But in most cases, you should try to move to early bound. And now I can see, okay, there's a typo on my slide here. And of course, a late bound is pretty bad, so you should move with early bound. Sorry for that, that's a mistake. Yeah, on the web resource editor, yeah. As I said, it's basically the counterpart to source control, so don't do it. And also the same thing with publisher prefixes. I mean, I prefer to have one prefix per project, so it's easy. And sometimes people don't care, they just create some random prefixes and then they don't understand, okay, how important it is, because you have a lot of problems if you have unmanaged layers and then you have managed layers, you can't fix it later on. So make sure you have a strategy how to manage the publisher prefixes. Another thing about development and pipelines, a lot of people ask me, okay, if we support the ICD pipelines for quality checks. Well, it depends. Right now, we're focused on Visual Studio, and as I said, we will launch another project, another product is an analytics platform where you can basically type in some stuff and you will see all the results. There will be connection to DevOps, but for now, let me explain the difference. And I say local context, as a developer in Visual Studio, if you write your plugins, it's important for you to understand, okay, I'm limited in my scope. So if I execute something, I don't know if on the other side something is going on. So you have your isolated testing scope, that's good. But on the other side, you can't know the side effects. And this is a problem sometimes, but it's fine. So if you have both, you have your quality checks locally in Visual Studio, and you also have it for the global context, then it's totally fine. Yeah. But it's a very important thing. If you deal with code in Visual Studio, there's no quality gate. So if you upload your assemblies directly to your system and then you deploy, there's no quality gate. So usually when you have your dev environment and you execute a deployment, make sure that you do it via the ICD pipelines and all assemblies will be updated. Otherwise, the code can get lost. So you update something, another developer is executing the pipeline, and you just export the solutions, and then you have your messy code with some random testing, whatever, on your production system. So this is why you should be very careful when you upload stuff directly from Visual Studio to your system. But on the other side, of course, you are very fast in testing and so on, so you don't need to execute the whole pipeline to run the unit tests. It's very fast, and this is where I say, okay, we would like to bring all of that information from the global context to Visual Studio. So if you write some code and you write some updates, like organization service update, whatever, we will show you, okay, there's a high risk that some other processes will start if you do that. Yeah? We'll see that later, but this is basically the difference between our small local context and the global context. It's a different focus, yeah. So in Visual Studio, we would like to see the changes or the impact of our changes directly. And the ICD pipelines, we would like to merge because every code has been tested already. But now we would like to make sure that it works together with the other parts, yeah. So this is the main difference here. And one important thing, please make sure that you use the release configuration, so you don't have those PDD files. They are not necessary, and also it's a security risk. Another few examples, yeah, about bad patterns and so on. We will talk about it later again. But in most cases, bad patterns are things like, okay, plugin target updates. So if you have your pre-operation, like, okay, create, delete, update, whatever, and you add some values, for example, for the account, you add the name, you edit the name, you should not trigger an update because this will create infinity loops in most cases. That's a very straightforward thing. So what people sometimes do, they move it to the post stage and then trigger the update. That's even worse, yeah. So in both cases, you should not do it. It's actually very easy to identify it if it's just one plugin. But what happens if you have multiple plugins doing more or less the same and you're not aware of it? So that's complicated. And this is why we also provide automated tools to analyze those things. And also for some other stuff, but I think this is not important for us today. I think we can talk about it later. And also a few slides about the big picture. But one thing about this one, this is basically just a reminder, I think we talked about it last time, why it's so complicated to identify logic. Yeah, we have so many different things. We have our views, we have our workflows, external systems, so it's complicated. And at the end, it's very hard to identify the right places to implement logic. But if you have a proper setup, and as I said, solution, you have your plugins, you have your projects there, so everybody knows how it works, then it's fine. But if you just use some random names, everybody's just creating projects, nobody knows what's going on, then it's very difficult. A few other things, I think we can skip this. This is not important for us. Then yeah, let me go back to Kupp Code Analytics. That's the topic. Well, for this session, I think it's a more important thing. We'll move on to KPI later, where we can analyze code and see how it works in a global scope. But for now, we would like to focus on those features. And as I said, let me put the highlighter here, the pen. Yes. Oh, that's the wrong one. Let's do this one. So this is our current release. And this is the scope I would like to show you today. I think we can, yeah, we have this one already, that's okay. And the other stuff is about analytics. So this is, I think, the scope for next time, where we can show you how to detect plugin loops, how to detect update optimizations and so on. So how we can do that in real time. I have disabled a couple of features today just to show you how it works without any support. But next time I would like to show you how we can check all of those things in an automated way. So we will have a warning directly within Visual Studio. But for now, another thing about code analytics, how can we convert from late bound to early bound? And that's a pretty tricky thing. I mean, the tasks are very simple because just straightforward, obviously. But if you have a bigger project, then you have to follow the code and you have to follow the triggers and so on. It's complicated and quite annoying. And this is why I would like to show you how it works in real time. So let's go back to our project here. That's cool. So yes, it's okay. Okay, so we got our plugin here, and this is, by the way, why I wrote the code manually, the whole thing, just to show you how we can convert it, because now we have, this part is cool. Let's remove that, we don't need it now. But the other things are more or less messy. So what we can do now is we can convert it. Here we go. Okay. So I only want to convert my account class. So let's go ahead. Okay, I got two documents, no errors. That's pretty cool. Okay, let's see. Okay, and well, the main goal of the whole thing is not to rewrite the whole code. At the end, you have to review it anyway, but it makes it so much easier because you don't have to read it line by line. So let's take a look at this example. I got the configuration here, but now I have the to-entity thing. And of course, I can edit manually. It's no big deal at all. But what if I have a more complicated thing? Yeah. So for now, let's convert that here as well, so we can see it. So now we got the configuration. I think that's cool. But what if I have multiple entities? In this case, I retrieve the first one. That's okay. And I got my configuration here. That's fine. Okay, that's good. But what if it's a little bit more complicated? So let's take a look at the very common use case here. Nope. Yes. So let's say I got this one. I have a pretty cool fetch XML here. Here we go. Okay, so this is a very common thing that people sometimes try to escape all of those quotes. That's bad. So I think you should not use a fetch XML directly in code. Yeah, there are very simple APIs to convert that. So let's use much easier. Okay, so yeah, okay, formatting now. So if I execute that now, it's more or less the same thing. So we can basically just go straight ahead and say, okay, we got the service, and we go back to with. Nope. And we got the query here. And let's go ahead. And this is another thing, yeah, with multiple, sometimes there are null checks, that's not unnecessary, yeah. So don't do that, don't do null checks if you know for sure there's always a value, yeah, just makes things more complicated, yeah. Okay, and now, of course, I can access the attributes. And by the way, yeah, of course, it knows, okay, which type of entity it is, because we can see it here, it's an email, and this is why we know it here. So, but of course, I can do the same thing. I can move it to another method, another class, and it basically will travel all the path down to the definition, and then we know it. But I actually would like to have early bound entities. Huh? So let's do that again. And here we go. So I got one issue, email entity is missing. Okay, then let's add it. Okay, email, yeah. Okay. Here we go, and now I can convert it again. Yes. Well, as you can see now, I have my select method called, and now I can basically use the whole thing as an email. Yeah. So this is pretty cool. Yeah, it makes my life so much easier if I join a new project and I have a lot of legacy code and I have to deal with it with some bug fixes, whatever. I usually convert, and it's pretty amazing. And of course, it works for attribute access and so on as well. So that's a pretty cool thing. At the end, what I usually do is I just run it and then I check it because I got source control, so I can compare both sides. Maybe I have to fix a few small things, but at the end, it saves me so much time. Yeah. Okay, cool. Then let me go back to my slides here. So yeah, go back to the pen. Yes. So as I already told you, Kupp Code Analytics is an Visual Studio extension, and most of the features for productivity are for free. So there are no charges. Also, you don't need a license. You can basically download it for Visual Studio 2019 and 2022, and you can just play around with the features. I think it's pretty helpful in many cases. Next time, I will introduce you to a few analytics things. So basically, the things we have done today, how we can detect it in a bigger project, and so we don't have to take a look at the code. And a few other things, as I said, integrations, Azure components, and so on. But for now, I think this was the quick introduction, the first part of our journey. And yeah, let's see. Now we got a few questions there. Let me take a look at that. Okay. Okay. So, okay, I need a few seconds to take a look at the code here. Okay. Okay, I get the paper here. So now, well, okay. Now I have paper here with the questions. Okay, I cannot answer all of them, but of course, feel free to reach out via LinkedIn. But let me try to answer a couple of them. Yeah, we got a question about integration with Copilot. Yeah, okay. Well, of course, if you're working together, it will depend on technology. It doesn't matter if you're using live shared Visual Studio and other tools. Yeah, if you have the extension installed on both systems, it should work. So as far as I know, there are no problems or no conflicts at all. The only thing what could be is if you're using different versions. Yeah, this could be a problem, but usually it shouldn't be a problem. So just try it out and you will see. And please just let me know if you have any issues there so we can try to help you. Yes, there's a few statements regarding our solution and the other tools. And I know there are a lot of other tools on the market to generate code, so it's actually nothing new. Yeah. But what we do is our approach is a little bit different. Generation of code is just a nice side effect of our core technology. As you've seen, we basically analyze the code and can show you which entity it is, but we can also show you, okay, which attribute, which relationship. And that basically means if you retrieve some data and you're using just a few attributes, but you're retrieving all columns, we can show you and tell you, okay, do you want to apply a fix? So you only retrieve the necessary data. And this makes us different because we analyze the code. We don't just generate the code, we analyze it and then provide the functionality. So this is more or less a basic feature to analyze the code and generate it. But the other things we will show you with the next release is, okay, how we can basically detect plugin loops or risk of a plugin loop and how we can detect side effects. There are a few things, but take a look at the roadmap and you will see it, and I think you will be able to understand why it's a little bit different. Yeah, but you're totally right. For code generation only, there are many tools. Yeah. Early bound logic. I'm not sure what it means. Sorry, maybe if I said that, this was a mistake here. So there's nothing called early bound logic. The only thing I usually do is when I create plugins, of course, they must be stateless. And by the way, this is also a thing we check. I create a separated class, a stateful class to handle the logic. So I can split basically the flow for plugins and the logic itself. So in the plugin cell itself, I check, okay, is the create up to delete? And do I need to change anything? Do I need to trigger something? And if I have to trigger something, I call the logic class and then I can handle the business logic there. So it makes things a lot easier. Yes, then, okay, if we run it in Azure pipelines, well, right now we're focused on Visual Studio, so we do the checks in Visual Studio, but as I said, there will be another platform to automate the process. So you have Visual Studio to check in a local context, and then there's another platform to do quality checks and reporting and so on in the bigger platform. And also, of course, this platform can be used by non-developers. So Visual Studio Extension KCA is for developers only, and the bigger platform is more or less a platform for every team member. So you don't need to know the code to understand what's going on. Where can I find logic triggers for all components? Yeah, actually, that's a difficult thing, as I said. So sometimes you have to open every single component, and especially if you're using logic apps and many other components, it's getting complicated. But I will show you that, I think, in next time or this one after that. I'm not sure, but I will talk about it as well. Yeah, but for now, there's no easy way to see it. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I think we're running out of time now, so I'm done with my slides here. Yes. Okay, then thank you for listening. And one more thing, I think you have missed something. Maybe it's nope. Okay, that's cool. Okay, yeah. Then thanks for listening. I hope you have learned a little bit more about quality and best practice. And I know this was a very basic entry-level thing, but next time we will talk about more complicated stuff. So looking forward to that. Thank you. Bye-bye.